Well, hello, good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. I know everybody's got visions of great turkey in their mind. If you're with us tonight, I appreciate you taking time out to tune in the show. I saw on the news tonight, on before I came over, that the president pardoned the turkeys today. So those two are safe anyway. I got a question to ask you anyway while I'm thinking about it. Do you know how to keep a turkey in suspense since we're talking about turkeys? Uh, think about it. How do you keep a turkey in suspense? Tonight's show, November 25th, day before Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Eve, we'll be finishing up the Black Experience Part 3. And we are going to be a few minutes of the question and answers from the symposium we did at North Carolina History Museum, and then we'll be going into some more information about how the civil rights movement was uh, and somewhat affected by the war in Vietnam to its detriment. Not the war, but the civil rights movement because of things were going on. So we'll be getting started on the question and answers. I believe we just finished with Harley, and we had a gentleman on the last show who sort of an answer, mostly made a statement, but we've got a few questions and answers, and then we're moving over to the other part. Let's go ahead and get started on the question and answers. We're just picking up from the last show wherever we were, so bear with us.
I want to thank you all for telling your stories, and I want to give a special shout out to you, Minister Ballard, for bringing the discussion back to the issue of racism, both abroad and at home. I have occasion as a volunteer to work with high school students, and I see that those who are interested in enlisting in today's military are largely our young people of color who have no hope of finding jobs, no money for college. Without a draft, it is becoming increasingly a poor man's and a black man's army. I wonder if each of you could just comment for a minute on what you would say to young people today who are thinking, as young people of color, of enlisting in the military.
Could I respond to that? I'm not a pacifist, and I do believe that there are some people that would come and harm us if we didn't have a defense system, okay? And one thing I encourage in young African-American males, if they're able to finish high school, see, but now it's discriminated by education, it's not by color. See, if you don't have a high school diploma, you can't go anywhere. I got 2 young men that I mentored and several men that I mentor, and I tell them like this here. One thing the Marine Corps is going to teach you is how to defend and take care of yourself. I think that every individual in America that calls himself a man should be ready to defend this country, okay? My thing is that if you go in the military, one, you can get killed quicker in front of 7-Eleven than you can get killed in the Marine Corps, because they're going to show you how to take care of yourself. But then the benefit is you're going to have benefits to come home and go to school. You know, your life is just as much as in jeopardy. Ask the young man that got killed in Briar Creek, would he prefer to be? And so my thing is that I believe that as I did, as my fathers did, that when it comes time to serve and defend this country, every young man should be, not locked up in jail. See, back in the days, you had an opportunity to get your life together. And it was either to go to the military or go to jail. They gave you that choice, and many went to the military, come back, and got their lives together. So I think it's extremely important, and we need to change from that. Like what you said, it's an educated army. Now I understand with the technology and everything, you have to have a basic education. See, when I went in, you didn't have to read and write. All you had to do was learn how to shoot. So now when you go in, you're dealing with $100 million people equipment, they're not going to put anybody on it, and it's a way to keep the young African-American male out of the military because they know many of them are not going to finish high school. So the basic criteria now, you've got to have a high school diploma. And today, I made $290 a month as a combat Marine. These cats are making $2,000 or $3,000 a month. You know? So I would prefer to see them in the military than in jail.
When I talk to high school students, male and female, that, you know, I sort of push for them to get educated, because education is the key to a lot of things in their future, just about everything in their future. But then again, for those, and I talked to some kids at the recruiting station a couple of months ago, I was asking them, they would sign up, you know, what they was going in the military for, you know, what job that they want. If you're going to join the military today, you need to be selective. You know what your interest is. And I tell them when they go into the military, pursue their interests. But while they're in the military, is to go and get educated in whatever it is they want to do. Because all the military installations today have education centers. Okay? Now, we've finally got the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is one of the best GI bills we've had since they've had the GI Bill since, 45. Take advantage of that you can get your BA or BS while you're on active duty, depending on how many years you're going to serve. Then you get out, use your GI Bill, your post 9/11 GI Bill, and get an advanced degree. Because today, in some fields, a BA or BS is fine. But in some fields, you need at least a master's or beyond to be gainfully employed. But the thing is, I always thank them for considering joining the military, because at least that shows that they do have some semblance of a direction in their lives.
Joe, you got someone up here?
Yes, gentlemen. Just wanted to ask the question about when you were in the when you were serving, actively serving. Were there opportunities for you to move to different levels within the military, or were you limited to some of those opportunities? And the limitations that you had, if you were limited, was it based on that you you weren't qualified, or was it just simply because of the color of your skin?
I'll take track of that one first. In the military, most of your advancement is based on your MOS, Military Occupation Specialist. In some fields, like when I was in electronic maintenance when I first went in, the seal in general was a Spec 5. I saw folks that had 22 years in the military, they were Spec 5s. Very rarely did you see an E6 and E7 in that field. They had some, but the slots were so few, and that was a limiting factor. Now, when I was a Spec 4 in the 24th Infantry Division, the 9th Cav, we had a board operation. I was an electronic maintenance guy, but I've been on border duty, and I worked in a TOC to deploy troops to the border area in Germany. This is East-West Germany border. I was a Spec 4 running as the Operation NCO in a board operation for the 2nd Squadron 9th Cav. The squadron commander came with some buck sergeant stripes, say, if you change MOS to a tanker today, I'll give you this stripe. But at that time, I was getting $75 a month pro pay for electronic maintenance. So I would have lost that $75 and probably picked up about $30. So I kept it. During my time, I was I say this, that I was blessed two ways. I my comrade here, I went to Vietnam. I was in many firefights. I've been in many ambush. I was ambusher and ambushee. My grandmother's prayers protect me. I've had bullets dancing between, dirt falling on my hand, going by my head and stuff. And I tell anybody, it was her prayer that sustained me, because back then I was too dumb to pray for myself. Didn't have time. I prayed not to run out of ammunition. You know. But my last job in the military was the best job in the military. I worked in the Joint Service area. That was Army, Air Force, Marine Corps. It was the best job in the Army. I was on the crisis action team for Secretary of Defense. I was stationed out at Fort Bragg. The job was created by the Joint Chief of Staff. I had a colonel that was the commander of the 1st Special Operation Wing in Herbert Field sending me a report. I was an NCO. I had a liaison officer, 2, a captain and a major. We used to go to the conference. They'll ask questions. And I know Captain Cook used to always get a kick out of it. He said, well, you got to ask the boss. They were talking about me. I said, no. I said, we are a team. You know, we are a team. But the thing is, the military, in the military was probably the first place in this society where minorities could achieve things. Now, there was some bumps.
Yeah.
There was some bumps. But the thing is, going from Hashmall Johnson down at Montford Point Marine, up through a whole lot of other folks.
Yeah.
You know, we have had people even at the worst time, made some strides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I want to say that I think that's the fairest employee I ever met was the Marine Corps. Okay? And I remember when I was in the Vietnam, I went over, I had one strike, and I was a grunt, and I was an ammo hunter. But when I got in country, I wound up with 60 mortars humping ammo. But one thing about Marine Corps, every day you got to drill. Every day you got to practice. I mean, if you're in the red, you're on that gun, you're going through drills. So my team leader, I wound up being the A gunner in 60 mortars. And he was getting ready to rotate out. So the sergeant asked me, who is the one that you would assign to become team leader? So I was assigned team leader. At the time, I was the last corporal. I had a sergeant. He was a bigot, and wound up finding out they don't even count. But he didn't want to give me even the strike, because with the strike goes your pay grade. And so for the longest time, he had me humping the 60 mortar, and I was in charge of a 4-man, 5-man team. Finally, the captain said, if the man can do the job, you got to give him the rank to go with the job. See, if you do the job, and if you learn to do the job effectively, the one thing, the promotion is going to come. And that's one thing I found about, and that's one thing I already remember, is the captain stood up and said, if the man can do the job, then the rank and the pay grade got to go with it. And so I didn't see it in terms of, well, and being a combat Marine, you know, I don't know what would go in the administration and said, but that was one thing about being a combat Marine, is that you got your rank as you perform, you know. And I always remember the Marine Corps only looking for a few good men.
Well, you know, as far as getting promotions and so forth, there's a horse's rear in the military just like it is in real life. As the sergeant kept him from getting promoted, there's people like that, whether it's in civilian life or military life. There's some, it doesn't make any difference, color of skin. You could be from the South or you could be from the North, and the guy's prejudiced because you're from the South, period. He's from the North. It wasn't always just on color. It could have been anything. Paul, you got another?
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Doug Ryder. I'm a lifetime member of EVA, Gator Navy. So I want to welcome all of you home. I thank you for the discussion, and Bill, you've done a terrific job moderating, to be commended. I just want to let you know also that I'm part of a group called Veterans for Peace. I don't know if you're familiar with that group. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about that. But my concern is the warrior energy that you talk about. This is also an opportunity for us to step into the civilian sector and to look at ways to change the system that isn't working. And I commend you, Harley, on your outspokenness, and I would absolutely say I'll stand in trouble with you. So if any of you are interested in hearing more about Veterans for Peace, I would love to either get together with you for a cup of coffee or whatever is a cup of tea, whatever would work. But I'll be hanging out here afterwards. And I thank you again, brothers.
Well, you know, all these men up here, as well as members of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, we go into schools all over the country, and we all talk about war is literally hell. It's a terrible thing, and we don't go in and talk about glorify war at all. It's our story and what you can overcome. But freedom is the most wonderful thing in the world. I've been back to Vietnam 3 times, and I've talked to the people over there, and they don't have freedom. I don't know of anybody who's got in an old Chevrolet and tried to float it across the ocean to get to Cuba. So freedom is whatever you have to do to get that freedom. And war is a terrible thing, and peace would be great. But when you got people out like ISIS and so forth out there slaughtering innocent citizens, we've got to do something to stop it, because they don't dare be here. Paul, I believe that lady, did you have a question before I go? One way back in the back, Paul. Then we got to call it up because it's way past my bedtime.
How's everybody? Thanks for everyone's service. My name is Gerard Morris. I'm an Army vet, West Point Prep, Fort Hood, Texas, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. But so many questions I want to ask at once. I had to get to hear it all. But lineage of Army veterans. My grandfather was World War II. My uncle was Vietnam, and he didn't come back the same way he left, and not in a positive way. We buried him about 8 years ago. But things about my grandfather, he shared more later than some of his colleagues did. They went to Hawaii and Philippines for World War II. I found out things from working. I worked for Senator Sanford and Mel Watt for a while too. But I found out things like those older brothers they had to ride on the top of the ships during inclement weather. They had to sleep down in the hose by the machine. There was unwritten rules where an award shouldn't, a recommendation for award wasn't going to get honored, World War I and World War II, if a black man's name was on it. Things with Vietnam, where my ex-girlfriend, her dad, he was with the Air Force doing logistics in different places, Taiwan and Vietnam, going back and forth. His story was probably a little more gentle than all the other ones. The impetus for organizations like National Association of Black Veterans and Blacks for Social Service, and just like the Congressional Black Caucus. And I got so filled by stories that had, from what I've heard, y'all stories sound a little more gentle than what theirs were.
Oh, most definitely.
But in that room, I guess because it was more of a homogeneous environment too, it felt more free to speak. I was wondering some of those things, and even in the West Point Prep, I was the highest ranking black, and I had a colonel who was the commandant tell the black tax sergeant that Morrison is good, and he can call cadence, but he's a little too ethnic. So can you get him to tone it down a little bit? I had cases where, then that same year I was there, the commandant for the first black commandant for West Point under Ronald Reagan, he was black. And then all of a sudden that same colonel contacts my tax sergeant about a week later, can we get Morrison to call the cadence for the battalion? So it was a show thing. Things like that. Then when we talk about mental health, even though I didn't do combat, well, when I got an A&T, of course I got out of there, I saw that I didn't really want West Point Prep. West Point, that's how it was gonna be. For the whites in leadership, it was a different set of rules. If they did something, it was called horseplay. If blacks did something or appeared to do something, it was called demerits. And that's even I was in the late 80s. So could you all speak to some things like that? And then on the mental health piece, when I've been trying to talk about certain things because certain environments, when I see remnants of this type of behavior, where I'm gonna be mistreated, all that, I freeze up. I don't go for that type of stuff. But when you try to prove some of the things for PTSD or ADHD and all this type of stuff, like you want, need all this type of evidence. You didn't go on a sick call. But you all know the stories where we're told you got to be twice as hard. You got to work, be twice as good. And I tell folks now, that family left, I tell these young brothers now, don't work twice as hard. You demand the same damn respect that everybody else, we get the same 24 hours as everybody else. And that's too much stress to be putting on somebody for that. And I'll end with the motivational speaker, Les Brown. I heard something recently on YouTube. He said, we're not fat because of what we're eating. We're fat because of what's eating us. So if you can speak to some of those things, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Listen, I thank all of y'all for being here tonight. I'm scared by a panel. A round of applause and appreciation. Douglas, I want to tell you one thing. The guy right there, standing right there, he also wanted to be in the Army band and didn't make it.
He was a Marine?
No, he wasn't a Marine, he was in the Army. But he couldn't get the band either.
They would let him in the Marines. Well, you know what Army means, right?
Don't start.
Ain't ready to be a Marine yet.
Afterwards, I'm going to have to tell you about why you were in Vietnam for 13 months. Again, thank y'all for coming out tonight. Look forward to our next symposium. And I wish we had a couple more hours because we're just really getting into the meat of things. And again, I appreciate y'all coming out. And guys, I do appreciate y'all being here tonight. And sorry I kept you a little bit later than we planned.
Well, that was the first part of our show, The Black Experience in Vietnam. I grew up in the South. I remember the white colored water fountains and the colored water fountains on the courthouse square. It never made sense to me then. Makes no sense to me now, the way the situation was then. I grew up on a farm. I played with black kids. I played with white kids. Didn't know the difference for a long, long time. I went to an all-white high school. There was a black high school there in town. Their uniforms in the football team were not as nice as ours was. So I can understand some of the frustration and so forth that as the black man had. We just kind of scratched the surface there. We've had a little bit of those three men telling you their stories and their time in the military and some of what they went through. The 60s, as you know, was a turbulent time. To be black or white was interesting. I had a sergeant that I thought a whole lot of. He was not the most educated man in the world, but he was a good guy. Always treated me well. He was an E6 in Vietnam, and I got from some of his comments towards the end that he saw some racial prejudices. Being a white guy, I never saw that situation. I know that a friend of mine was a black trooper, an E4, which was what I was at the time. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a kind of a invisible barrier between us. Don't quite understand that all myself because we had always treated each other with respect and were, friends. We hung out together and so forth. So one of the aspects of the 60s was the civil rights movement. And again, everybody is entitled to their own opinions. Everybody's not entitled to their own facts. And doing the research, I discovered something I hadn't really thought about before. The civil rights movement was harmed by the war going on in Vietnam. During that period of time, LBJ had his program can't remember the name of it now, it just escaped me, one of those senior moments, the New Deal, I believe it was, or something like that. And he was trying to fight poverty and so forth. So a lot of the black leaders of that day didn't want to come out against LBJ and speak bad about the war in the black soldier in Vietnam, because they were hoping that LBJ would help them out with the poverty situation in the country. And LBJ was known to be somewhat vindictive, arrogant man, so they didn't want to go against him a whole lot, and so that was some of the problems that was coming up, which we want to discuss now. And we saw three different men who were, two of them were Marines who had different jobs, and we saw Ellery, who was started out as more as a glorified clerk, who ended up in the special forces and their experiences and so forth. Everybody who served in Vietnam, depending on the time, their job, branch of service, all had a different experience. That was just three of the men's experiences. You saw from some of the people who stood up and made comments towards the end, there were different experiences, but different jobs, different branches of services, and all had a lot to do with your experience. Go ahead to the next one. And, so the men and women who served, go ahead to the next one. Mm-hmm. Went too far. Nope. Okay, moving right along okay, go from that one. I might have got one. Trying to get our thoughts in the right order here in this symposium. Okay, one more sheet. Okay, let's deal with that one. We have, during the symposium, we've experienced what it's like to be a person of color during the 60s and so forth. One of the things about the Vietnam War, it was the first really fully integrated, racially integrated conflict. In other wars, the black soldier or the black warrior has always fought since back during the Revolutionary War. But as wars went on, they were regulated to things like supply, cooks, janitors. For some reason, somebody decided along the line that the black soldier was not able to go out and be a combat troop, which made no sense whatsoever. But there's a lot of things in our past history that didn't make a whole lot of sense because people came up with it. But this was the first war that really on a daily basis, the white soldier and the black soldier were side by side doing their jobs, which created some situations in itself, but it also solved some situations in themselves. But there was some tension because of the white man who was not used to working or understood the black man and vice versa. So there was lots of tension were starting to come up in Vietnam. And Wallace Terry, who wrote the book, The Bloods. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you ought to read it. It's oral history. He actually went around and with a recorder and recorded some of the black soldiers in different aspects of the war as far as time, jobs, locations, and so forth, and got some of their comments, feelings, and so forth. Along about the time that Muhammad Ali decided that his name was Cassius Clay. He joined the Muslim religion and changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And he was getting a draft notice, and he got up and said, I'm going to read this so that I don't get it wrong. They want me to go to Vietnam to shoot some black folks that never lynched me, never called me the N-word, never assassinated my leaders. That was one of the things that he had to say about the draft. He refused to go, even as a conscientious objector. He refused to go, lost his title. He paid a price for it, but he did stand up for what he felt. In 1968, before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he just started to speak out about the war, because the word was going out that the black soldier was being killed much more often than the white soldier, because they were using them as more in infantry and so forth. going back to in the beginning, the military was more racially diverse than average society. So a lot of the black warriors went into the military for their career because it was a way for them to advance in life and as well as the military. So there was a good proportion of the black soldier in Vietnam in the beginning, which was may or may not had a lot to do with the fact that more and more of them were killed in the beginning. We're going to go into that a little bit later on, but proportionally at the end, it was the overall proportion was the same thing as the national population between blacks and white. But after he was, and Martin Luther King, of course, his thing for civil rights was peaceful demonstration, no violence. But after he was assassinated, the more radical groups started coming forward and getting some attention and power and so forth. And that's where some of the problems started coming in with the more military people. And as things were going along, getting more and more upheaval going on with the violence and so forth, back here with the soldiers in Vietnam, seeing what was going on here and what they were doing over there. Of course, the communists took up about that, and the American soldiers or the American government dropped leaflets all over Vietnam, inviting the former Viet Cong or the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese troops to change sides through the Chi Hoi program, Open Arms program, and go over to the South Vietnam side. Well, the communists did the same thing for the black soldier. They told them that if they'd go AWOL, they'd help them get out of the country, so they wouldn't have to put up with the racism and so forth. And sometimes, if there was a group of American soldiers out on patrol, the Viet Cong may shoot the first guy if he was white, and let the black guy goes by, and then shoot the next guy if he was white. Basically, they were trying to gain with the situation between the black and white soldiers. But when it came down to real life, it's proven that if a black soldier and a white soldier were both captured, it didn't make any difference about the skin color. All of them were basically treated pretty bad. A black soldier by the name of James Hawkins stated, "In the jungles, you don't think in terms of black and white, but the disparity in interracial hatred as a rear basis is where the problems were." As you all saw, all three of those men talked about the in the field where they were getting shot at. Everybody was basically equal. Now let's talk about look here at this chart that shows the casualty rates from 1961 to 72. From 1960 to 64, there were 12 blacks killed. The 185 total men killed. The black percentage was 6.5. Okay, really kind of low in comparison. But in 1965, there was 186 blacks killed, 898 total killed, and the ratio was 20.3. Now, 65 and 66, as you can see, there was definitely more of the black soldiers who were killed in combat than the white soldiers, which really was when they were coming out and talking about using the black soldiers, cannon fodder, and so forth, which may have been back to the reason of the black soldier being more of the career soldiers and so forth. As the draft was coming in, more and more black soldiers were being drafted. But you see in 1967, it changed back to 13.4%. In 1968, which was the biggest year of all of them because of the Tet offenses and so forth, there were 1,220 black soldiers killed, 9,333 total, for a 11.5%. Pardon me? Yeah, 13.1. I'm sorry, I dropped myself down there. Which was still just a little bit higher than the average in the population of the black soldier. It was a little more than 12 something, not 13, it was 12.4, 12.6, something like that. And it moves on down. By 1970, you only saw 9.1. 1971, 8.7. 72 is 7.6. For the from 1961 to 66, it was 20. The overall was 20.1%. 1967 to 72 was 12, and 61 to 72 was 13%. So, if you look at the statistics that way of actually who the race of the people who were killed, the African American soldier, the black soldier who died in Vietnam gallantly fighting for his country, was not disproportionate to the black race in the United States. So a lot of the myths that the blacks were killed in large percentages really kind of depends on what year you looked at. It's hard to realize that the period of time of the war from 1959 to 1975, basically, it was a long time, but you got to look at it as 1 year at a time, because most people went to Vietnam, served 1 year, and then came home. Now, some served 1 year, came home, went back again. Some of them repeated for a year and for 2 years and so forth. But the Stars and Stripes magazine newspaper, I remember getting it in Vietnam. It's still out there today. I read it a couple times a week myself. Talks about here how the civil rights movement came in a casualty of war. And when I saw this, I'm going, just how did that come about? In 1966, about 2 years after Civil Rights Act was signed in place by Lyndon Johnson, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee came out and said, as a result, it became the first civil rights organization to oppose the war. And even then, when they came out and started talking about opposing the war and so forth, the media jumped all over them and said they were radical, didn't know what they were talking about, and so forth. Excuse me, I still got a little bit of this crud here. So even though they started coming out and people were starting to see these things that they've been saying all along were true, they were still put down in the press. Excuse me. I've had 3 bouts of whatever this is. So the group, as I said, was really put down, but things were still beginning to grow, get more hostile, and so forth. You have to remember that the young black man who was at home was listening to the radical groups, frustrated, seeing some of the inequities in society. Excuse me again. I've been talking, I'm going to lose my voice here. Who all of a sudden got drafted. And they had 2 choices. Either leave and go to Canada someplace and go to Vietnam. And most of them went to Vietnam rather than leave the country. Even though that they were questioned as they were going, why are you going over there to fight the white man's war? Because the war protesters were using the black soldiers being used as cannon fodder, which was not necessarily the truth. So the young black man was getting grief in the United States. And then it was going to Vietnam, and the attitudes were changing, and that's where you started having some of the problems with between the blacks and whites in Vietnam was in the late 60s, early 70s, because the reflection of what was going on here went to Vietnam. It's not like they were isolated over in Vietnam. They saw television, they saw the news, and so forth. The civil rights movement itself was a casualty of war. Historians have subsequently agreed by creating dissension within the civil rights coalition diverting attention and siphoning off money that would have been spent on the Johnsons' domestic programs, the war on poverty, and the Great Society. That's what he was calling the Great Society. So where they were trying to be on Johnson's good side and not speak about the war, the leaders of the civil rights movement ran into problems with their own people because there was dissension going on there. But they were behind the war, but they were afraid to be out against the war because they didn't want Johnson to turn against them, and because they wanted the things they could get. But it got to the point that they had to step forward and start and speaking and so forth against the war, which did not make Johnson too happy. So basically, it gets down to the point that the Vietnam War divided the civil rights movement and African Americans more than any other event in American history, because it did have the people who wanted to fight poverty and fight inequalities non-violently, and then you had the other people who were frustrated and didn't want to wait any longer, and the only way they could see it was their opinion was to get out there and burn things. Never has made a whole lot of sense why you burn your own stores and so forth, people that supported you, but that seems to come out of the civil rights movement also. It was somewhat destructive to the black community because in the beginning you had the draft, and it's been shown now, a lot of people talked about the draft as been a great inequity in that, and being a white soldier, I saw it myself because quite often friends whose fathers had a little bit of money and were on the draft board, they didn't have to go, and the rest of us had seen we always got our draft notice, and there was very few blacks on those draft boards. And when they went from the draft to the lottery system, it was much more equitable because you didn't have those influences of the people. It was basically bounce of a ping pong ball, how things came about. But in the beginning, I went in the draft, just like a lot of my friends did. Actually, I joined the Army to keep from having a draft, but beat them out. But also you had people in the military, a black soldier in the military who was serving, but when he came back home, he still couldn't go to a restaurant and sit down and eat. There was still the inequities back here, so you could come back and want to go back and get on with your life and so forth. You've been trained in the military for whatever, but there wasn't jobs necessarily available. So a lot of those guys turned right back around and re-enlisted and went right back into the military, which ended up sending them back to Vietnam again. All along, the military was a way of the ticket out of the poverty and so forth. Just like the lady who stood up and on the question and answers on the show talked about her students, African American students or black students, talked about going to in the military. I somewhat hate to see the draft, even when inequity is maybe the lottery. But I knew a lot of guys who got out of high school, didn't know what they're going to do with themselves, black or white, and got drafted, went in the military, learned some discipline, learned how to take care of themselves, came back and had a very productive life. As Harley mentioned earlier, it was either going in the military or going to jail. And I know soldiers, black and white, who were given that choice by judges. And so that, even though it was a time to join the military and get and rise up and take better care of yourself, it ran into a thing. Just like I was talking about this Sergeant First Class Alan Thomas here, that's illustrated here. He was in the ranks fighting, and then got in trouble for a racial slur. And depending on who your leader was, if he was a good leader, your color of your skin didn't make any difference. If he was a weak leader, and he was had his own prejudices, then the black skin or the white skin or the yellow skin could make a big difference in how you were treated. During the Vietnam period of time, a lot of people were made officers or made rank who would never have done it any other time. Just look back at Calley, William Calley, who was the lieutenant involved in the My Lai incident. He was a weak lieutenant as far as leader. Things got out of control, and we had the massacre at the My Lai or Pinkville, which everybody's heard about. And another show will do a little bit more of the history of My Lai and some of the other things going on. But you're out there with, depending on, in his case, he got treated bad because he got in a fight. So he got out, was going to use his skills, and didn't work, so he had to go back into service again. Alfonso Wright talks about being in the Navy, 167 men, and it was a sign at the port. And it was actually a sign here in Raleigh, not too far from where I'm sitting right now, at the Shaggy Dog bar on Western Boulevard in Raleigh some years back, and this is what it said. There was a sign outside the port reading, "No sailors, no blacks, no dogs allowed on the grass." And that's basically the same sign that was on in the 80s here on a restaurant off Western Boulevard. So there was those problems even back then, and didn't necessarily go away. One of the reasons some of the blacks were going in was they wanted to prove themselves and prove to everybody else that they were truly, bless you. Amnon had a sneeze there. Everybody seems to have this little tickle here that what I've got. A lot of them wanted to go in and prove they were just as good as anybody, because in the beginning, as we talked about, a lot of the black soldiers were made as cooks and janitors, waiters, and so forth. But during the Vietnam War, they were allowed to fight right along beside the white soldier, and a lot of them felt like they had something to prove, which also put a lot of pressure on them during the period of time. And because of the draft board, we found ourselves more black soldiers were being drafted. So I'm going to skip that. And Lieutenant George Schofer was one of the highest ranking black officer in 68, was talking about the casualty rate and so forth. And this is his quote: "But the performance of the Negro in Vietnam tends to offset the fact that the Negro wasn't considered worthy of being a frontline soldier in other wars." The Pentagon even used that argument. But in 1966, because of people coming back and talking about the black soldier being used as cannon fodder and so forth, the Defense Department acknowledged that African Americans accounted for 31% of combat infantry troops the year before, and started to take steps to remedy that. So in 1966, 31%, almost double, actually more than double, almost 2.5 times the amount of African American or black Americans who lived in the United States were serving in the military, because it was between the draft board, it was a way to get out. But you run into another situation with a black soldier who went in and tried to do the best job he could, look after the black soldier and the white soldier. He was called Uncle Sam's Flunky. I've heard it being the black soldier or black man being called Uncle Tom, because they were trying to work in the white system that it was at that time. I don't care how you look at it, there was somewhat of a white system, even though it was trying to straighten itself out. People on both sides, all skin colors, black, yellow, red, all have our prejudices. It's not necessarily always skin color. It could be education, could be background, but they're all there. But sometimes when someone who tries to work in the system goes into it. And I've heard this said on some of the elections that the guy he wasn't black enough because he was trying to work in the system. So he wasn't black enough for his black friends and so forth, which to me puts puts the black soldier in a bad situation because it's hard for him to move ahead and do a good job and move ahead because he's looked at sometimes by his own race as trying to be a turncoat rather than working the situation. That's a prejudice on those people, just like any other prejudices. It's a nasty thing. It's that snake out there that whips his head every now and then up all the way through. And during the civil rights movement, which is one of the problems of the war, nobody wanted to speak. None of the black leaders wanted to speak, as I mentioned before, about what was going on, what they thought was going on, and so forth, because they didn't want to make Lyndon Johnson mad. And as it says here, if you weren't with Lyndon Johnson, you were against Lyndon. If you weren't with the war, you were against Lyndon Johnson in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and then he started speaking out, and this is what to quote him in one of his speeches: "A time comes when silence is betrayal, and that time has come for us in relation to Vietnam." Up until that time, he always tried to make a low profile on what was going on or what he felt like was going on with the civil rights movement and the black soldiers in Vietnam. So he finally, once he got some credibility with the Nobel Peace Prize, he came out and started speaking against it. Martin Luther King also came out in April of 1967, Riverside Church, and the quote also was, U.S., he said, was the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. And he insisted it was morally imperative to halt the war. Even though the United States was not going to take over Vietnam as the British had done with other places and the French had done, he felt like that we were causing the war and so forth. That's what he says in his speech. Now, how much of that he really believed, or what anybody believed, it's hard. You don't want what's in somebody's heart. 3 weeks after that last speech was when Muhammad Ali refused an induction when he said that nobody in Vietnam had ever called him the N-word. Since World War II, the black leaders have praised the military as a shining example of integration and equal opportunity. Even though in World War II they were able to go in the military, they didn't have the opportunities before. But as I said, the Vietnam War, good or bad, as far as the member of the black soldier who had gotten killed, had equal opportunity to go out and give their life on the line as everybody else. So there was a price to pay for getting that freedom. That's not exactly a freedom to go die in proportionally. You also had a group came along at that time was the Black Panthers, the urban who started the urban riots we talked about a while ago, and the first ones were in Watts, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. They came up with the philosophy, burn, baby, burn. And that's when they started burning, looting in stores and so forth, to show their frustration and their against the government and everything else. The only trouble is that it was most of their neighborhoods that were burning. During that period of time, the black troops who were going to Vietnam were influenced by the Black Panthers and so forth. So you had soldiers going to Vietnam who were members of the Black Panthers and carrying their frustration and the attitude of burn, baby, burn going over there. And it's kind of like Harley mentioned before. He was in New York gangs, went into Marine Corps, had an attitude, went to Vietnam with an attitude and got a Section 8, which was a mental discharge coming out. They went over with an attitude which caused more problems, especially for those who were back in the back. If you remember, I mentioned Sergeant Thomas a while ago. He says, his quote was, "I stayed angry all the time." There were two types of black soldiers in Vietnam by the late 1960s. Lifers like him who'd been around the world with the military, and teenagers, many of them drafted, most of them steeped in new black pride, and some of them said angry, arrogant young men. And that created a problem between the black soldier and the black career soldier in Vietnam, as well as with the younger soldiers in Vietnam between themselves, not just the black and white, but soldiers between themselves. Institutional racism affected blacks in every facet of the military. One glaring discrepancy, only 15% of the whites charged with being AWOL went to the stockade, it said, but 40% of blacks did, which goes back to why Thomas got out of the military for a while, because of he was sent to the stockade for getting a fight for a guy who called him the N-word, or racial slur. So it all comes down to it wasn't a black or white thing as much as leadership. As mentioned a while ago with Callie, if you had a weak leader or a prejudiced leader, then certainly the black soldier who got in trouble was punished more than the white soldier. It's not the way it should be, but it's the way it was, and hopefully now that all that has changed, people are more aware of it. By 1968, we're going back over the years, going back to 1968, with Martin Luther King and the civil rights group starting to speak out against the war. The war protesters using the propaganda, which was not always the propaganda of the American, the black soldier was being used as cannon fodder, and so much. All this goes back to that movie, The Perfect Storm. Everything was in place for all the problems and so forth that was going on. It's amazing to me when you look at what we just talked about. There wasn't more problems and so forth back in the bush, back in the base. The guys back in the base, you would go to your area, and another guy would go to his area. It wasn't necessarily race as much as it was the country western guys went and listened to country western music, and the rap guys, which wasn't rap back then, but the soul music, went and listened to theirs, and so there was, that was kind of a separation there. And but in 1971, the Department of Defense convened a task force to study the causes and possible cures of racial discord. Reforms followed, including the start of the Defense Race Relations Institute, the forerunner of today's military equal opportunity program. So even though the military all along was talking about there was no such thing as going on between racial problems, they did come back and realize there were racial problems. I'm running out of time, but I do want to take a second to talk about a black hero from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. His name was Lawrence Joel. Lawrence Joel, now, everybody here has seen the movie probably, or heard about the movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. It talks about the first large battle of the Vietnam War. If you were part of the 173rd Airborne, you think the Battle of the Hump was the largest battle, because it actually happened before Ia Drang Valley. The 173rd was out on patrol, become under attack, and Lawrence Joel was a medic. He served in the United States in both the Korean War and the Vietnam War. While served in Vietnam as a medic, assigned to 1st Brigade of the 503rd Infantry of the 173rd Airborne, he received the Medal of Silver Star, and then the Medal of Honor. And what he did was, on November the 8th, if you've ever heard the song Big and Rich, 8th of November, it is about this battle. It's called the Battle of the Hump. He was the first living black American to receive this medal since the Spanish-American War in 1898. He was a medic. They came under fire. He was wounded in the leg. He continued taking care of the wounded. He was wounded in the chest, bandaged himself up the best he could. He kept right on. Well, even though they tried to send him out to get medical treatment himself, he stayed with his soldiers. It says here that there were 13 wounded he saved. I have talked to some of the people who were at that battle, and they all credit with Lawrence Joel saving their life. He went from soldier during the firefight. He kept getting up and taking care of the soldiers, paying no attention to his own safety, exposed himself to incoming fire constantly. When they finally got him out, he spent 3 months in a hospital in Saigon in Tokyo, and recovering from his wounds from his right calf, and received the Silver Star, which was later given to President Johnson gave him the Medal of Honor. In his presentation speech, President Johnson spoke of Joel's very special kind of courage, the unarmed heroism of compassion and service to others. I'm glad to be alive, Joel said before he go into Washington to receive his medal. I just wish I could have done more. I never say that I deserve the medal. That's just not me to say. It was just my job. There's a lot of mistruths and truths about the Vietnam War and the people who fought the war. As I mentioned before, everybody's entitled to their own facts. Their own opinion, but not their own facts. As you go out and do research, hopefully this opens up your door and you go out and do some more research. The black experience in Vietnam, as well as the white, red, brown, yellow, were all the same and different. It depended on the time, as I said, time, place, and circumstances. Our next show, which will be December 9th, I'm going to be going out of state. I'm actually going to New York, and I'm getting back that day, but I'm not certain I'm going to be back in time for the show. So I've asked for someone to step in, and a former participant of the show, Joe Harsh, who was a LERP in Vietnam, will be doing the show for me on December 9th. On December 5th, we'll be having the normal POW kickoff with the Marines and Harley Group at the Memorial here in Raleigh, doing their Toys for Tots kickoff and so forth. November 13th will be the candlelight service. So if you're anywhere in the Raleigh area, be sure and come down at 6 o'clock at the Capitol, State Capitol, for the show. And then the show after that, the one after Joe, we're going to be doing a show on Vietnam and our vocabulary and how we said it. We had our own interesting vocabulary at that time. Some of it a little bit complicated to say on air, but we got a couple of shows getting up. I've got some authors who want to come on first of the year and do some shows. So we got some people who actually want to come on, and looking forward to next year. I won't see you before Thanksgiving because that's tomorrow, but have a good Thanksgiving, and I will see you before Christmas. Good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.